Hello, Thomas.
Hello, Brandon. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. How you doing?
I'm doing okay. A little bit hot here, but we'll soldier on through. And since Wednesday, I've had this box waiting to be unwrapped.
What kind of box?
It's a small flat rate priority mail box sent from a BD to me at work.
That's the Basil department.
The Basil department. Very good. Very good. So, my previous unboxing knife, I listened to the sound, it was kind of wimpy. So I found a slightly more impressive sounding unboxing knife.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. So, let me get unboxing now. I have to point out, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do a good job unboxing it in terms of visuals and vocals and all the other kind of stuff, because you set an unbelievably high standard associated with unboxing.
Well, it was exciting, man.
Yes. Well, I'm excited with anticipation as well. So let me start by slicing a little bit, loosening the glue, which appears not to have had any fastening ability whatsoever. And I'll slowly open this. I will put the knife aside, because that will only close it up. That will only do unnecessary damage. Ah. Did you recycle the bubble wrap, or is this actually new bubble wrap?
No, that's your bubble wrap.
Very
I always
good.
try to save it.
Recycled bubble wrap, much appreciated. Okay, so it's hefty. It's small but hefty. Okay, so let me very carefully unwrap here, as much in front of the microphone as possible. What do we have here? Very neatly wrapped. I'm seeing made in China.
Oh, yeah.
Very good, very good. So, the first thing we have as I unwrap are 4 red peppers with seeds. Let me see what these things are. Aha! So some are yellow and 2 are red. My anticipation is a little bit of water, a little bit of soil. And I was thinking about this. If I actually grow these, I've got one co-worker that I play D&D with that our mutual friend Art knows. And he's a chili aficionado, so I promised him one of the plants. And obviously I've got to give one to Art as well. But wow. So actually what I'm going to do is actually break some of these open on the recording to anticipate how many seeds I actually have through these. So, sorry, I'm doing a very poor job.
No, this is great, because I was surprised. I took a few from Lee as well, Lee Webb, and he I thought he was going to give me like a handful, but he literally gave me what you have and 2 more.
Oh my goodness!
I was like, they're so scarce. I'm excited, but
yes.
But go ahead, continue.
Well, all I'm going to do with these is propagate them and grow them for many seasons and pass them on to as many people as possible, but always under the name Lee Webb.
Yeah, we call them Webby peppers. That's kind of what
peppers.
Webby peppers.
Very good. Well, as this is the West Coast, I might call them Lee Webb's official hybrid chilies or something like that. We'll create some folksy name for it on the West Coast. So yeah, I have possibly, as I break them open here, maybe in the order of 30 seeds, give or take a few. So I will plant these in half a dozen punnets and see how many come up. This is from the last season, I'm assuming.
Yep.
Very good. And I will propagate them as much as possible. And is this the size they're supposed to get to, or are they supposed to grow bigger?
No, not much bigger if they do.
Okay. Because these certainly are very small chilies by my chili standards. I mean, even in terms of Thai chilies, they normally get at least 1.5 inches long when I grow them. So, okay, I will certainly plant those. But that is only a small portion of the items within the box. So, Legano Toys. Is it, how do you pronounce this? Langao? How do you pronounce it?
I don't know.
Legano Toys.
Oh
my goodness. Oh my goodness. Now, folks, I need to describe this. I am seeing fishing wire over plastic. This is can we use the term knockoff here?
You gotta.
I think that's legitimate. I need to actually open the knife again, because as many of these plastic things are, oh my goodness. Let me sniff. Let me inhale. Oh yes. Oh yeah. Oh. Chinese dyes, definitely. Very definitely. Some kind of plastic that no doubt is carcinogenic. Did you find this in a dollar store locally, or did you buy this online?
No, it's off eBay.
Ah, alas. Very good. Well, let me cut myself with my unboxing knife, and oh my goodness. The tension. Yeah, the tension is not quite right. You can't actually flip them like the... Uh-oh. Yeah, they're not quite... Let me see if I can... No, the tension's not quite right in the... They'll move in some directions, but they won't move in other directions. Okay.
No, keep playing with it, because I ordered one too.
So, eventually it kind of loosens a little bit.
Oh yeah, and then it fully, yeah. I was like,
so it's not quite the, but still pretty good. Thank you very much, Brandon. This is amazing.
Oh yeah, my pleasure. Yeah, I had to hold one of those things.
Yeah. Once you start manipulating them, actually, the tension gets right.
Yeah.
It still has a little bit of trouble in some directions, but I think maybe after long-term play, it will eventually loosen up, hopefully. No, that's very nice. Thank you.
Yes, yeah. I passed that around on Mother's Day at the table, and I was surprised at how many people knew it. They were like, this is that Rubik's Magic thing. Yeah. And I was like, well, they were like, it's a Rubik's Cube thing. And I was like, yeah, the magic. And they were like, a lot of people knew what it was. And everybody was just talking and flipping the thing around. I said, this is great.
Certainly. Well, I had no anticipation. It was funny, actually. I was reflecting on some of the strangest things I've ever received in the mail and thinking, what on earth could be in this package? I had a fellow who actually painted a majority of my figures, my miniatures in the UK, and he once sent me a lock of his girlfriend's hair.
Oh, dude.
But he did it accidentally. Like, they were into strange kind of conventions, let's just put it that way, where people get together. And apparently it was just floating around and just mysteriously ended up embedded in the miniature box when he sent it to me. But that was very strange, kind of receiving dyed red hair, and it clearly wasn't a man's head of hair. That was very cool. But I'm trying to think of when I used to do a podcast, and it had certain folks that followed the podcast, including some kids that lived out in Missouri that made their own hallucinogens, and they never sent them to me, but they sent them to the other host of the podcast. So he received some DMT in the mail once. But I'm trying to think what else strange things that I've received in the mail. But yes, this is well received. I'm going to have to put it down. I'm going to have to put in the discipline that you put in when I send you boxes of Legos and things like that. But thank you very much, Brandon. And I will send photo updates associated with the, what they call Webby's chilies, right? Or Webby peppers. Webby peppers.
Webby peppers. Right. Yeah, I had a hard time growing them a couple times, and I actually had them all in like an egg carton with the soil. They wouldn't grow. They wouldn't germinate at all. And then I finally took them, threw them out behind my shed, and they all grew. It was like I had a fortress of plants. So I was like, well, maybe
it's to do with water and humidity and general pressure, because I've had exactly the same problem. Like, if you baby them, they'll never come up. And if you throw them somewhere and just leave them, they'll come up every time. So
yes. Oh, I did it again this time. I stuck them behind the shed, but I kind of planted them a little bit, but we'll see. Hey, listen, so the Rubik's Magic, I haven't had one in my hand or seen one in person in 15, 20 years. So we were talking about it. So I went on eBay and was like, oh, here's like 2 knockoffs. Let's just see what it's like. Let's see if it's as good as it was, And all right, so I did that, and they came and I was playing with it, and now you got yours. So today, our community has a yard sale, and I go over to this park with my daughter, and we're walking through, and right on this table for $1 is a box sealed Rubik's Magic, still in the box, never opened. I was like, I can't believe it. I was like, I can't believe it's right there. So I was like, I went over, I opened up the front flap, and I was like, this is so weird. I was like, I can't believe after all these years. So it's like I get 2 in like a week. I was like, oh, dude, it's awesome.
There's something about that once you become visually, I mean, probably, I don't know, 6 months ago, you would have walked past that without even thinking about it, perhaps.
Yeah.
It's because you're more visually acute to it now, I think, that these things. Because I find that happens all the time, to the point where, there's all this mythology associated with how these things will come into your life. But typically it's like when you buy a car of a particular color, you start noticing everyone drives the same car with the same color on the road. It's one of these curious things. So we have a number of listener-submitted topics this week.
Oh, yeah, let's do it.
In fact, the listeners have gone crazy. One guy... I'm going to start off with this guy. He's the last guy to submit it, but I'm going to start off with this guy. He goes by the name Onion Eye. He submitted his questions on a piece of cardboard. This podcast, historically, we talked about getting a logo and things like that, and my wife's been away for a long period of time, and she's just come back. But the the makeshift logo that we have currently, I actually just wrote Attic Aficionados on a piece of cardboard, took a photo of it, scanned it up, and it became the podcast logo for the time being. So Onion and I submitted his questions on a scanned piece of cardboard, which I thought was particularly nice. Anyway, Onion and I writes, love the podcast. I've listened to each one and greatly anticipate the next episode. I've come up with some possible topics that might generate some good dialogue. The first topic is pogs.
Oh, did you have anything to do with pogs?
Pogs are a little bit late for me, and I suspect they're probably a little bit late for you. I remember I was probably in the 6th grade, and I remember seeing a bunch of kids playing with pogs, but they were all like 2nd graders, 3rd graders, and I thought, these fools. These fools.
Yeah. I worked at an arcade, and they had like a ticket redemption counter, and at one point they got pogs, and it was like a younger kids thing, and I wasn't really into them, but then after they like died off, they had just mountains of pogs, and so they were throwing them out. So I took a bunch, and like not even a month ago, I was going through boxes, and literally I was like, well, I'm recycling these. I got rid of them all.
I have no memories associated with these things. Get them out of my life.
Yeah, I was like, I got to draw the line somewhere, keeping tons of crap. So I got rid of them, but I tried playing it before, and I actually had like one, I think I kept it. It was like one little pack of like collector's Mortal Kombat pogs, but I was like, this is round pieces of plastic and cardboard. I was like, yeah, whatever. They were weird. No, I didn't really care for them.
I tend to have experiences when I'm at social events, typically weddings and, my wife's friends and these kind of things, where I find that I'm an outsider. And my brother got married maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and his wife's sister's husband, he does pub quizzes. That's his thing. He's like a pub quiz master.
Okay.
So for, many family gatherings, he and I were on opposite sides of the room. And then somehow I realized that he actually collected action figures, and he had a small collection of miniatures, and he collected comic books, and really actually we had a lot of stuff in common. So I introduced myself to him. We kind of talked more, and we became friends on Facebook, and he absolutely loves the photos from D&D night and this kind of stuff. But he is a collector of pogs. And I would imagine he's probably only a year or two younger than me, or younger than us. So I think probably in that demographic, pogs mean a huge amount. But for the rest of us, not so much. The next topic Onion Eye submits is other bizarre 1980s memories, which is a very wide and broad topic. But when you reflect on the 1980s, we've talked about the boardwalk, we've talked about little bits and pieces, action figures, the beach, these kind of things. Any other curious 1980s memory?
Not off the top of my head. How about you?
I reflect on female fashion of the 1980s.
Sure.
I reflect very heavily because, this is kind of puberty, pre-puberty, but what was fashionable in the 1980s, particularly amongst women, dropped off very rapidly somewhere through the 90s. And it's interesting actually coming from Australia, because Australia had its own things, right? It had its own fashions and what have you, but big hair, these kind of things, I don't know. My wife is the youngest. You're the youngest too, aren't you?
Yep.
My wife is the youngest, and her sister, who's probably 6-7 years older than she is, had big hair. Had 1980s style hair and all this other stuff, and actually continued it on through the early part of the 90s. So when I reflect on the 1980s, women's fashion in particular, I don't know, life is life. It's hard to have other bizarre 1980s memories, but we'll come back to this one, Onion Eye. This will be a recurring topic.
Yeah, I'm sure it will be, naturally.
A topic that I think Onion Eye knows we'll have something to talk about is bootleg knockoff toys.
Yeah. Knockoff toys in general are hysterical. I always got an eye out for that. I got some, I gotta send you a picture of this. I got, it's a knockoff Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 4-pack. It's hysterical. I'm just gonna send you the picture, but they basically took green ninjas and painted shells on them, but they're men. They're not even turtles, and I forget the name of it. But they were at a store down at the beach, and they were like, I don't know, $15. And I came back here and was in a dollar store, and they were $1. I was like, look at them. I was like, oh, they were like adolescent ninja man, green man, something. But that's what they should have been called. But yeah, I do like the knockoff toys, man. They're sometimes better. I got a knockoff Darth Vader that's hysterical, that lights up and everything. It is like a blatant Vader ripoff. Do you have any interaction with knockoff toys?
Toys. I don't know. I never spent enough quality time in dollar stores. I mean, I think this is really the part in our mutual experiences. For me, getting into toy stores was just so rare anyway. And in Australia had all these funny rules, like where it was very difficult to actually import knockoffs and these kind of things. And I don't know, less toys was just a general theme through my childhood. So it was only until I came to this country where I started to realize, particularly as you say in the action figure, particularly the larger action figures, there were bizarre kinds of knockoffs. And I guess when I walk through dollar stores now, it's usually the smell more than anything. There's something about like dollar store bleach and this kind of stuff, which just permeates the air so wonderfully. It wafts through the aisles. And then, of course, the strange kind of polyurethane smells of like really cheap plastics in certain areas. So for me, it's more a sensorial overload.
Yeah, there is a general smell they all have. I don't know what it is, but there's something grape flavored in it as well. Yes. I don't. Yeah.
Yes, cheap grape. So yeah, usually when I go through the toys at dollar stores, I'm rather partial to cap guns in various forms. And I think certainly in Australia there was a period of time where cap guns went out of fashion. But here they've never gone out of fashion. So usually I pause around the cap guns, but I don't actually, unfortunately we have cats. So cats and cap guns don't generally go together. And cap guns and married life and cats generally don't go together. So I'm more an aficionado from afar of cap guns. But yeah, I think in general knockoff toys, I don't know. For me, toys were just few and far between. So when I did get them, they never lasted for long periods of time, but very rarely knockoffs. Another topic that Anya and I proposes, which I think we'll have something to riff about, is best thrift find.
Oh, man, that Rubik's Magic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. That was pretty good. I used to get a lot of props from
yes,
the thrift stores. But, yeah, geez, off the top of my head, I don't know. I'd have to think about it.
That is probably one of the few locations. I mean, thrift stores, certainly as a child, it's one of the few locations where I would get curious action figures. There was a secret agent action figure that came with a little plastic case that would self-destruct internally. And it was all made out of cardboard, so the self-destruction was all strange and cardboard internally. But I certainly played with that a long time. I mean, we talked last recording associated with the board games that I'd take to beach houses. All of those were thrift shop finds.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is a lot of board games, you know, I would get there. There's always seems like a ton of board games and then things that like slightly vary from a typical, you know, board and die game. But yeah, they smell pretty bad too, though.
Certainly. They have a different kind of smell, like, yeah. It's
like a bowling alley in sweat.
Yeah, but there's clear human urine elements to it as well. It isn't just, I think what's the Macklemore song where he has a extended break associated with psss. And yeah, that's certainly a thrift shop smell element.
Yeah, definitely.
Another thing that he suggests, and I actually had to Google this individual, you may know this individual, but Ralph Bakshi Animations. Have you heard of Ralph? Or is it Bakshi? Nope. It must be Ralph Bakshi. So I looked him up. He directed the Lord of the Rings movie in 1978. He directed Fritz the Cat in 1972. And he directed Mighty Mouse in 1987. And he's done various other things. He's of a visual quality. He has that, what's the, like the Dungeons and Dragons themed, Laserdisc game? What's it called? Dragon something?
No, I don't know.
It was one of the first live voice things, but they're all cartoon characters. Anyway, he has that kind of visual, but I'm not sure if he's connected with that. Certainly, I didn't know any of his work. I mean, Fritz the Cat, I've seen 2 or 3 times, but I mainly watch that because of Robert Crumb's cartoon work. Are you familiar with Robert Crumb?
No.
He had a documentary made about him in 1990, which I think is one of my more favoured documentaries of all time. A lot of his stuff is really poor. I mean, certainly coming to the Bay Area periodically, I would buy Robert Crumb books. He did Fritz the Cat, he did Mr. Natural, Keep on Truckin'. I mean, basically he's a alternative cartoon guy from the 1960s on. A lot of his stuff is fringe pornography in some regards. But no, I've certainly got a lot of time for crumb. But no, unfortunately, Ralph Bakshi is not someone I know about. Final topic, which I know you have a lot to talk about. Old kung fu movies.
Oh, yeah. You gotta love those. Do you ever watch those at all? Have you ever?
So Australia has this curious thing which is loosely called monkey magic. I think it's about 50 episodes, and I'm not sure where it was made originally. It was either made in China or Taiwan. I think it might have been made in Taiwan. And it's associated with the monkey god Sun Wukong, who went on adventures. He basically was a monkey that was born out of a stone rock, and it's a Buddhist, well, it's not Buddhist actually. Our Chinese co-workers I've talked to about this. But it's a long series, lots of martial arts, lots of kind of strange morality plays and what have you. Netflix is actually going to be producing a new series of monkey magic. But that was a big part of my childhood, a big part of basically anyone who grew up in Australia through the 80s and early 90s, though, monkey magic. And that was all kung fu, but it's not like Bruce Lee. It's actually, I don't know, like mythological battles, basically. Obviously, a good number of Bruce Lee movies. Obviously, some blaxploitation kung fu stuff, which I have a lot of time for as well. What are your favorite kung fu movies?
You know what? You know what's an awesome movie? My friend Tung, who's Vietnamese, had a copy of this movie, and it had like Chinese subtitles, and the language was in Vietnamese, but we watched it, and it was awesome. And like years later, I found it at a kiosk, but it's actually pretty popular. It's called Invincible Armor. Just check it out on YouTube. I'm sure you can see it. Just the whole premise of it is. It's awesome. I'm not going to ruin it, but it's just that if you like guys jumping off of buildings and then floating up backwards, I love the floating in the old kung fu movies, and the beards and everything, and the sound effects are awesome, and then all the cheap effects they do, So they used to always run this thing. It was called Saturday Cinema. So it was like after Saturday cartoons would end, you would get like, usually before the cartoons, they would do Three Stooges, then they would do the cartoons, and then like early afternoon, you would get, if they weren't running sports and it was like some off channel, you would get usually like PHL 17 would run it, then it was Saturday Cinema, and it was just cheap kung fu movies dubbed over, which made it even better. And it's funny because I always thought they like made them in Australia or something, or had something to do with it, because they would have Australian guys talking over it, or English guys. And I was like, oh, what's the obsession with all these? Like, there's never just an American guy talking over it. But yeah, that's those, any of those things, like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. I went to see that. My friends were like, yo, you're going to love this. You're going to love this. Like you love Van Damme and all this stuff. And then when I went, I couldn't stand it. I hated it. And I was like, they're like floating on wires the whole time. I was like, I can't. I couldn't stand it. I kind of was like, nah, I'm not into the new stuff at all. So, but yeah, that's if you're floating around and the swords are going and the sounds that they make are going, and like the punching sounds are hysterical. I always like, how do they make those punching sounds? Are they just like whacking a trash can with a broom? It's like, but that's what I like.
Two things that are kind of in the genre. One was a show associated with like a concubine that became empress. It was called Empress Wu. We got a lot of strange Chinese stuff in Australia. Australia has a channel called SBS, which is basically a foreign language channel. And for years, SBS would play these strange Chinese, they're effectively soap operas, but they're kind of martial arts soap operas. And the other thing, which I think is really his own genre, and he has had a little bit of crossover in the US, but not so much in terms of his old, like, really bad, curious stuff, is Jackie Chan. And Jackie Chan movies are their own thing. But they do have a lot of kung fu elements. And I'm trying to think which one. There was one that was filmed in Kuala Lumpur that I really liked. And always with 3 or 4 kinds of subtitles at the bottom. Like, English, traditional Chinese, sometimes Thai, So, yeah, these are, but they're not really old kung fu. They're really their own thing.
Yeah, Jackie Chan, I think it's Drunken Master 2. Yeah. It's like, so that's like one of the greatest. It's, I think his bodyguard, there's this guy who kicks like crazy. He's like the kick master. I think somebody told me that was his bodyguard in real life, but man, his stuff is awesome. Even his corny stuff is awesome. But yeah, the older stuff, that movie in particular is it's awesome, dude.
Our friend Adam Czarski is writing a follow-up email. I found through the week, in fact, I have in front of me a 3.5-inch floppy disk with SchmuckQuest 1 and 2 on it.
Yeah.
And I posted that to our Twitter page and Facebook and various other places. And Czarski responded, all of a sudden, I'm taken back to the first computer games I played. I believe the first time a computer came into my house was back in 96. It was a Pac Bell running Windows 95, I believe. I remember games like Ski Free, Fuji Golf, Rodent's Revenge. I remember having a few disc-based games like Mega Race. The voiceovers were bad in all of them. Typical 1990s slang. I hated that computer. Adam Czarski. So, in terms of games of that era, what kind of games were you playing in that time frame, Brandon?
You know what? We had I think it was a TI 99, Texas Instrument 99. I think that's what it was. And then my dad brought home like the voice emulator for it, or simulator, whatever it was called, or modulator. And we had like 3 games that really worked, that were good for it. And it was Parsec, and Munchman was like a ripoff Pac-Man, but I think it was way better than Pac-Man. And then there was like a math game that would say like these funny phrases, so we would just play it for that. But just basically, I played the TI 99, and then from there, I never really touched computer games. I only went to Intellivision, and then to the original NES. And then from there on, you know, but no, like my cousins had computer games and stuff, but we never really got into anything. And then we had Macs after a while, and we play different stuff on that, but that was later.
What would you play on the Mac?
Oh man, I don't even. That was towards high school. They had Jez Ball. I would always play Jez Ball. Remember that game? Dude,
no,
that
I'm trying to think. The Mac games I had were Scepter, Dark Castle, Beyond Dark Castle. I'm trying to think of the others. Well, obviously Falcon, the flight simulator. What else? And then when you got into color, there were obviously Duke Nukem and Shadow Warrior.
Oh yeah, and
Shadow
Wolfenstein.
Warrior. Yes.
Wolfenstein, and my cousin had this game. I don't know what computer it was for. Maybe the Commodore, but I think it was called Karateka. It was like a karate game, side scroller. I remember I played it there like one weekend, and then we had to leave. I was like, this is the greatest game ever. You'd have to go through the stages and fight people, and it was like, I don't know. That was cool.
Stunt Copter. I remember Stunt Copter. I'm trying to think of the other games. I mean, this was around the time that I started writing my own games as well, so I always had this kind of crossover period of actually playing games. Because some of the games were quite interesting, except it was an adventure game, basically, and you just wandered around this relatively large scale with very poorly drawn graphics, but at least some graphics. And yeah, I don't know, the whole period. I remember spending long periods of time on Falcon, which was just lines basically representing flight simulation. And my father had a PC, and when I went over to his place, when Grand Theft Auto, I think probably Grand Theft Auto 2 first came out, this was like a turning point. You're like, okay, games have gotten to this level, basically. But, yeah, I don't have many memories associated with playing games until we didn't have computers. That was the thing. I had to go into the local university or use friends' computers. And a friend had an Amiga, and the Amiga was pretty interesting because they, would get hacked games from various parts of the world. And obviously there was a lot of like text files and kind of underground hacking stuff that came in through that period of time. Do you remember, what was it called? The Jolly Roger or the Terrorist Handbook or this kind of stuff? Did you ever get those text files?
No.
They were like miscreant times. It's funny, actually, I was talking with my co-workers. One of my co-workers actually built one of the bombs from the Jolly Roger and managed to blow out a friend's kitchen with like tiny little particles of burnt sugar, these kind of things. No, they were classic miscreant texts. Actually, the hacker, John Draper, also known as Captain Crunch, he was in one of those texts. He was in an Esquire article written in 1971. And that text was like burnt into my brain when I was about 13 or 14. I have to meet this guy. Like, this guy's like, the epicenter of a wide variety of really curious things. So I met him when I was 18. It was not a very pleasant experience. It was very, very, very strange. It's actually a series of stories where I used to tell them in public to a certain, I just meet people and tell them these stories. So I said, with this guy. And then I told these stories in San Francisco probably 3 or 4 years ago with a coworker there and the coworker's friend who had just met again after 10 years of not seeing him. And I don't know, at some point I went to the restroom and the coworker's friend started talking about, like, deep, intimate things from his childhood. And apparently, the set of stories associated with John Draper just elicit this kind of emotion from people. So I've been told not to tell these stories in the future. But for listeners of aficionados and for you, Brandon, I don't mind telling a few of these stories. So I didn't know anything about this guy. This is the internet, right? This is the early stages of the internet. No one knew anyone. There were no photos online of who this Captain Crunch guy was. And I was in college in Australia at the time. I was 18. So the guy just turned up with a bunch of flunkies. And he was, I guess, in his mid-50s. He looked like he was homeless. And this was Captain Crunch. The guy gets out of the car and, you know, he's got 2 or 3 flunkies that he's bringing with him. And I need to point this out. When I came to go to university, I decided, because I'm a moron, that I should live in a convent. And I came to this decision for a series of basic mistakes. But when I went to live in the convent, my mother had left the country. She'd gone to Malaysia, so I was basically by myself. And my brothers had left with her. And when she filled out the paperwork, she put down that my father was a Jew. And that, she filled out the paperwork. And I didn't realize that, particularly amongst country Catholics, Jews were not particularly well liked. You know, that's the whole killing Jesus thing and a variety of other stuff. So I was immediately an outsider in this convent. And the whole thing was very curious. So when this crazy psychedelic hippie guy turns up and proceeds to eat, 5 plates of pancakes and demand more pancakes and just be a really difficult person, my social stock, which was already relatively low, fell dramatically more. So the first thing he does is he says he's got this energy blockage removal thing, which is like a massage technique. And I'm like, okay, well, this is a bit strange. I was 18 at the time. I was I'd done some traveling. I traveled up into Malaysia and what have you. But I thought I was relatively worldly. So this old guy proceeds to get on my back and get me to do push-ups and a variety of other things. It was prison sex-esque, but nothing penetrative. Anyway, so he does this for about an hour. And I'm just like freaked out. So I'm like,
Tom, that's like a whole podcast. That's like the whole podcast.
Yeah. Details are not necessary here. But he does all this strange, like, massaging and all this curious stuff. And I'm basically being molested by a childhood hero of mine, but very much kind of, yes, you want me to do push-ups on one arm now? Oh, yes, you want me to do all this other stuff with him hanging on my back, basically dry humping me. So this whole thing finishes, and I'm completely stunned and shocked. And my friend who promoted Shine and did various other things and came and stayed with me for a few weeks or what have you, he came in the room, and he was next. And he asked me, so how was this thing? And I was just like in complete shock. And allegedly, according to him, I said, it was exhilarating. So then Crunch proceeds to molest my friend as well. And anyway, Crunch was just a really difficult character. He continues to be. I'm actually editing his biography, his autobiography, currently. The fellow who did Dallas Buyers Club wants to make this thing into a movie. Not the molestation of Tom Barbalet, age 18, but basically everything else that this Crunch guy has done. So he stayed with me for about 2 days. And I realized through this period of time that he had a bunch of LSD with him. And he was giving LSD out to people in the university, including attempting to give it to the nuns, because it was a convent. As you do, you give LSD to nuns. Anyway, so after about a day of him being there, he wanted to find some weed, which of course you could never find in a university. I mean, what kind of craziness is this? So anyway, my friend went off to find, and I was exhausted by this stage. This guy had just completely, run me and my friend ragged. I mean, aside from the energy blockage removal, he wanted to see and do a bunch of stuff. I mean, we were basically at his beck and call. So I went off to do something and proceeded to come into a shared courtyard, and Crunch was in a fetal position, screaming because apparently my friend had tried to poison him with some tobacco. The weed was laced basically with tobacco. And at this point, the nuns said, okay, Tom, you've got to remove your friend. So we proceeded to kind of scurry Crunch off to someone else, which is the history of knowing this guy. And then the next day, I realized that I had lactic acid buildup. Have you ever had lactic acid buildup?
No, never.
I was paralyzed. I was like the Michelin Man. I couldn't move, basically. And my friend couldn't either, except he lived on the second story of a house and couldn't get downstairs to answer the phone or do anything. So he was royally screwed. I was at least surrounded by people. So, yeah. The one legacy thing associated with Crunch is that he left a pair of shorts behind when he left. And he called me up at like 2 a.m. 3 or 4 days later wanting to get his shorts. And I'd already washed his shorts, you know, his shorts were there as an artifact left over from this man. But it turns out when he came to Australia, aside from wrapping the LSD in the pen, he'd also sewn the LSD into these pair of shorts, which I proceeded to wash, which apparently ruins any potential future use of this hallucinogen. So Crunch and I have kind of got back in contact occasionally with one another. But, yes, he's an interesting character, and, yeah, his bio's going to be interesting. I'm not sure if they're going to make it into a film. But I've had on and off again, and he's also the origin of the crack house in suburbia as well. So, interesting guy. But avoid the energy blockage removal. Funnily enough, CNN did a piece on him in 2000 and wrote extensively about how young boys were getting lured up to his room at some hacker convention to do energy blockage removal work. So, well covered by the media after that. Oh, here's the funny story associated with this, though. I had a friend in the US called Douglas Rushkoff who writes articles on technology folk, and I'd been in correspondence with him associated with Crunch. And a few days after Crunch left, I was collecting email, as I do, and I got an email from Douglas Rushkoff where he said, "You didn't let him touch you, did you?" And I said, "This is an act of war. If you send someone into someone's midst who does these kind of things and you don't warn them in advance, you warn them after the fact, that's an act of war, right?" He said some strange dude that's just going to molest you and your friends in, and then after the fact, after he's left, that's when you warn him, "Oh, don't let him touch you." Anyway, a few more Crunch stories to be sampled at a later time, I think. So that's Adam Czarski. Jeremey Salazar asks, he's not fully caught up in the podcast, but if we haven't already talked about it, we should talk about pro wrestling.
Yeah, I don't know. I used to like it. Now I don't like it at all. You know, back when it was cool, like Ultimate Warrior, Bret the Hitman Hart, you know, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. I don't know. I liked it then. Now I don't know. I don't follow it at all. It doesn't seem like there's any characters. It just seems like it's regular dudes wrestling. But yeah. I could be wrong. I really don't. I stopped following it years ago.
I mean, there are so many levels to this thing. And I mean, I think one of them is a commercial level, obviously. But certainly in the UK, and to a lesser extent in Australia, there are actual, like, local professional wrestling groups that put on shows and this kind of stuff. And they always were rather curious. I mean, there was, as you say, there's a heyday of wrestling in this country. I mean, Jeremy also notes that Pennsylvania has a huge hardcore wrestling scene with the rise of ECW in the 90s.
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that was awesome. Yeah, that was pretty. I mean, that's like a whole nother level. But, yeah, if you know it, you know it. And it's, geez, those guys work hard. Yeah, if you see it in person, you're like, oh, man. I mean, one time they came to this local farmer's market and wrestled there. And then, like, I guess they had like a cash box for taking tickets, and then somebody stole it. So they just got up on the microphone and just like ripped apart the town and the people that lived there. And they were like, Downingtown, Pennsylvania is the worst place. The farmer's market is awful. We're never coming back. Somebody stole the cash box. And we were like, oh, man, this is hysterical. But, yeah, there's a match between Terry Funk and and the Sandman. If you've ever seen that, it's the most bloodiest thing ever. It's awesome. There's like at one point there's like barbed wire in there, and there's barbed wire. I don't know, something. They're bleeding everywhere. Terry Funk is bleeding everywhere. It's like the most blood I've ever seen in a match. But there's like a ladder that gets thrown in at one point, and it's just like they're just putting it on themselves so they can get hit with it. It's hysterical, but I don't know how they can even do it. It's an awesome match. It goes on forever. It's what is it? What's the name of the match? I can't think of the phrase they use for it. It's like a 3-word phrase or something. It's like a 3-man dance. I think that's what they call it. There's a third guy that comes in, but it's awesome. I'm sure it's on YouTube. But yeah, Terry Funk and the Sandman 3-man dance. I think that's what they call it when there's 3 of them. But yeah. Anyway, are you familiar with that at all, ECW?
I don't know. I mean, my perspective of wrestling, I've watched it at various times. My father's father, who was also a Rambo aficionado, was a huge fan of wrestling. But I don't think I mean, this was the late 1980s.
Yeah.
And it really was very... a lot of body oil, a lot of strange kind of... let me just say it, homoerotic kind of things going on. I mean, it was a very strange format that this was... But wrestling is a phenomenon to me. I've always found... I mean, you have, like, kids wrestling as well. And that's a completely different thing again. I mean, you have this, up to college wrestling, and then you have wrestling as a theatrical event. So, yeah, I don't know. I always like the really lowbrow regional stuff that you occasionally get in the UK, where it's just guys that are usually like the butcher or, the florist or what have you, but they don these crazy costumes and start, body slamming each other.
They used to have, I remember they were like WWF Wrestling Superstar ice cream bars.
Yeah.
And they would like print the Ultimate Warrior and like, Honky Tonk Man on these ice cream bars. And I was like, man, it was everywhere, and like video games and stuff. But when they were more characters, I mean, they had figures of all the guys. They still do, but I guess I just haven't followed it. And I'm sure there's still characters in there, but it just seemed more of like, okay, there's like these action figures, now the wrestling guys. And I don't know, it seemed awesome back in the day. And I don't know when I got out of it, but I always liked, nobody liked Mr. Perfect, but I love Mr. Perfect. It was so awesome. He'd spit his gum out and then smack it, when he got into the ring. I'd always try to do that. It was so awesome. But I gotta go watch some of that stuff. Yeah, I did like wrestling.
It's like boxing, right? I mean, there was a period of time where boxing had real meaningful characters that, and now, and again, I probably, as you say, if I spent more time watching it, maybe I might get into the contemporary boxers, but there was certainly a heyday for that thing, and I guess we'd echoed that wrestling had a similar heyday.
It's funny, when I go down like at the toy aisle and I see, like, I'll look at the wrestler figures and I'm like, man, they're like cool figures. Like, they make them well, but there's just nobody. I'm like, just some dude. It's like Bill Smith. I'm like, I don't want to collect Bill Smith. I want a mask on there and like something cool, Like, I did see a cool Ultimate Warrior figure the other day. I was like, look at him. I was like, well, maybe he's just a warrior, but I don't know. I seen this guy one time when I was and this is in the 80s. He was like a construction worker, and he was in Toys R Us in front of me in line, and he had an Ultimate Warrior tattoo on his arm. It looked like he just came off of like laying blacktop, and I was like, that dude's got an Ultimate Warrior tattoo. I was like, and he's like buying wrestling guys. I was like, this is what I want to be. I was like, this is awesome.
Yes.
Did you watch Rambo?
Yes, I did, actually. That's an interesting point. Yes, I did. I did watch Rambo. You know what's particularly funny about that movie?
What?
The river that they go along, my mother, 60, I guess she would have been in her mid-60s when she did it. My mother's been along that river. And the timing is very interesting because it's filmed in 2008, I think.
That sounds right.
I actually emailed my mother and said, when did you do the river tour? And she did the river tour in, I think, 2013 or 2014. And it was all touristy all the time along that river. And then, so obviously a lot can change in 8 years in movie terms versus reality terms. But yes, the only, if I can be critical about anything, the kind of dark period, doing it at night for certain parts of it was a bit of a letdown. But look, you warned me, and I've got to thank you. And I'm also watching Boardwalk Empire currently under your recommendation. I'm up to season 2. So, anyway.
Yeah.
Rambo. What I did was I stopped the film with 45 minutes to go. Actually, literally watched it, then stopped it, said, I'm going to come back to this tomorrow and watch it again. It is some of the most... It's interesting, actually, because, like, World War II movies started to go into this people exploding, like, bloodshed kind of thing.
Yeah, they are exploding.
The violence is pretty there. I mean, it's pretty upfront. And, I don't know, I mean, if you take it out of the historical context and just enjoy it as a Rambo movie, it's a Rambo movie. And I think it's interesting, actually, the number of dudes that they're up against at nighttime versus daylight, and also the use of machine gun fire, clearly very cinematic. You can see that Stallone has progressed in his directorial form through these series.
Take it easy.
It is I appreciate it as an epic in the genre.
There's a huge chunk of crap in the middle.
Yeah. No, that whole process. But the other thing is, you do see this occasionally. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Hostel movies, like Hostel 1 and 2.
Nah, I never watched them.
So they're similarly filmed in areas of peace, but they make them into war zones, which is actually part of the joke. The Roth guy who does the Hostel movies came afterwards and said, yeah, it was actually a joke to make these appear like they were the Balkans, even though they were actually a peaceful area. This area did have a lot of bad dudes in it for some period of time, but 6 years after this film, the area which it's supposed to be going through was basically a tourist route with, a bunch of middle-aged women taking long boat trips, eating extraordinary food, stopping at various points and doing tourist shopping and stuff like that. So yeah, it's interesting in that kind of cultural context. And that whole Thailand thing, the snakes and this kind of stuff.
Oh, that's horrible.
That's all there to this day. You can, Thailand has always had a really curious relationship with tourism. Obviously, there's the whole kind of X-rated tourism part as well. They try to make these, what it is the government-run tourist spots. And there's always some strange cobra ring thing with guys that clearly have been bitten by cobras many, many times, but are just like playing with the cobras for tourist interest. I guess if you have a heavy hangover and you're probably going to see, women do extraordinary contortions in the late evening, watching guys fight snakes during the day makes some sense. I don't know. Thailand is its own country, its own thing.
Yeah, I don't know. I love that. His line, live for something or die for nothing. My friends were ripping that apart. I was like, this is...
Is it live for nothing or die for something? Or is it live for nothing and die for something? Yeah. It's so bad. It's so bad. I was like, oh no. But when he blew that claymore up, and he gets on that 50 caliber machine gun and guys are just ripping apart. Oh, I wish you could just rent just that part. Or just buy just that part. Yeah. It's like, yeah, that's awesome. But well, listen, I have to cut it a little bit short tonight. Oh, okay.
Unfortunately, but
we have one more listener question and we have a bunch of topics which we'll just have to save till next recording.
Yeah, sounds good. I like that wrestler's comment. That was good. Yeah, well, of course I liked your Captain Crunch story as well. I don't think I'm going to eat sugar cereal anytime soon.
Yeah. Sweaty doing on your back. Brandon, always a pleasure. We'll record again next week. Take care.
Sounds good, Tom. Yep, take care.
See ya.